Buenas tardes, good afternoon to people in the US, good evening to people in Spain. Welcome to the webinar, Biden era and its impact on the US-Spain relations. I apologize because we started a little bit late. Ambassador Solomont is connected, but he was having some trouble with the microphone and the camera of his computer, and we are hoping he will be joining us soon, but we don't want to make you wait. So we're going to start. My name is Gonzalo Garcia. I am the president of USEC, which is the organizer of this event. USEC, or the US-Spain Executives Community, is a nonprofit organization founded in Washington, D.C. in 2014 by a group of business people, executives, and entrepreneurs. Our mission is to promote networking and professional development among our members to improve collaboration and encourage business relations between Spain and the US. This event is sponsored by Tariffs, Banca, Porcelanosa, and Artichoke, and we're very grateful for their support. You can find information about them and links to their company webs in the event description on USEC's webpage. So we are going to start talking to our guests. Like I said,
can you hear me, Gonzalo?
Yes, we can hear you, but Ambassador Solomont, I had to mute you because there's a problem. The sound of your computer is going into your microphone. So you'll need to use headphones or use a different way to listen, because otherwise it creates this background noise that is very annoying. So anyway, so like I was saying, this event is sponsored by Tariffs, Banca, Porcelanosa, and Artichoke, and we're very grateful for their support. And you can find information about them and links to their company webs in the event description on USEC's webpage. So we're going to start a conversation with Ambassador Cabanas. We are going to learn about Biden era and its impact on the US-Spain relations, and we are honored to have Spain's ambassador to the US, Santiago Cabanas, and former US ambassador to Spain, Alan Solomont. Ambassador Cabanas and Ambassador Solomont, we are very grateful to have you here. We're hoping to be able to solve the technical issues on Ambassador Solomont's computer as we speak. But let's start with the first question for Ambassador Cabanas. Thank you, and welcome to this webinar. So let me say a few things about Ambassador Cabanas. He served as the ambassador of Spain to the US in September 2018. He holds a law degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid and joined the Spanish Foreign Service in 1981. He has had a long career as a diplomat in many countries and already knew the US extremely well before assuming his current position, thanks to prior roles as a political counselor at the embassy in Washington, D.C., and as consul general in Miami, Florida. So the beginning of the Biden era has created significant expectations for changes in the relations between the United States and its allies. And in the first few months since the new president was inaugurated, we have witnessed important events that have a direct impact on the bilateral relations between Spain and the US. So, Ambassador Cabanas, there's been a strong expectation of a new era of multilateralism, which should improve significantly the relations with the US in multiple areas. As an example, this is illustrated by President Biden's Day 1 executive order, by which the US officially rejoined the Paris Agreement on climate change. What other events along these lines would you highlight from the first months of the Biden administration having an impact on the bilateral relations? And what are your expectations for the next few years?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you to you and to USEC for this very timely webinar and seminar. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and to be here with Ambassador Solomon, my good friend. I hope we can solve these technical problems and we can have a good discussion. But in any case, thank you very much. A great honor to be with both of you and all the friends who are here with us. Well, it's a very pertinent first question to start this discussion. I believe during this past very difficult year and a half, or well, over a year, we've seen two very important events in the international scene. Of course, the pandemic and the result of the US elections. And for Spain and for Europe in general, I would add another event, which is the Brexit. But let's stick with the pandemic and the result of the elections, which means the end of unilateralism of the previous administration. They came, these two big events, in the framework of the questioning, the crisis even, we could say, of the liberal world order that we've known since the end of the World War II. A questioning due to three main factors: the huge impact of globalization, the enormous acceleration of technological change due to this fourth industrial revolution, if you want to call it like that, and certainly the shift in the structure of powers in the international scene due to the rise of China. So the pandemic and the shift from unilateralism to a more concerted multilateralism, and from the part of the United States, it continues to be the great power, the world leader in many respects, gives us an opportunity to build back better, to reconstruct the world order in a better way. With three main pillars, I would say. First, humanizing or correcting the excesses of globalization. Second, strengthening the democratic values, which continue to be the backbone of our societies. I always remember the words of a former Minister of Foreign Relations of Spain, Piqué, who said, we're going into a post-Western world, but we should fight to retain Western values. I think that's very right. And third, and very important, with a renewed multilateralism, which I think is the only way to face the great challenges that we're facing. Climate change, poverty and inequality, health issues, what we can call the natural security, that is the risks stemming from our relations with the living world, and that includes the possibility of other pandemics, nuclear proliferation. We need this new kind of multilateralism, and we need American leadership. We need the American presence in that world. So the Biden administration has, as you have mentioned, taken some measures that are very encouraging. The return to the climate accord, the Paris Accord, it's a very important one. We're going to celebrate from tomorrow the climate summit with the participation of the Prime Minister, the President of the government of Spain, and it shows the importance that the US administration, like the Spanish administration, attaches to the fight against climate change and the need to go into a more inclusive, more green, more digital economy. So, but this has not been the only sign. We've seen also the willingness of the US to cooperate with the rest of the world and with alliance partners, the needed reform of the World Health Organization, the needed reform of the World Trade Organization, and so many others. We're trying to return to the JCPOA. So these are very encouraging signs, and they are very important for Spain, because I think there is a great coincidence between the aims and the objectives of the new Biden administration and the Spanish government. So my impression is that we're going to have a reinforcement of the cooperation between EU and certainly Spain and the United States in the much needed effort to reform and restructure and build back better the world order.
Very good, Mr. Cabanas. We're still having trouble with Mr. Solomont. I'm hoping he'll be able to join us. But
you can't hear me, Gonzalo?
Yes, now we can. Thank you very much.
Then you'll just have me. You won't be able to see my beautiful face, but you'll be able to hear me.
Well, we'll go on like that. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Solomon. We appreciate your participation. And I know everybody gets confused with so many different applications that we're all using during these crazy times. And tried to do a test earlier, but we're not able to complete it. So anyway, I wanted to ask you, Ambassador Solomon, and again, this is supposed to be a friendly dialogue, so I'm just throwing questions out there on the topics that are most relevant for our community, but feel free to comment on each other statements. And so I want to ask you, Ambassador Solomon, about immigration.
Before you do, Gonzalo, let me just make a couple of comments in response to my good friend Ambassador Cabanas, and it's really a pleasure, if not to see him, to at least me talking with him. And I want to thank him for his excellent representation of his government in our country during what has been a very difficult time. And I've had the pleasure of being with him on a number of occasions, and his country should be very proud of him.
Thank you.
We are coming out of. You're very welcome, Santiago. Our country is coming out of a very difficult period in terms of our position in the world. The Trump administration, in terms of its approach to multilateralism, was a complete reversal of traditional American foreign policy. I remember when I served as the United States ambassador to Spain under President Obama, our whole approach was based on the notion that the problems of the world are too big to be solved by America alone, but no big problem can be solved without America. And so the position of the United States is that there were no national problems in the world. There were only global problems like the pandemic, like transnational terrorism, like the worldwide economic crisis that we faced in 2008 and that we are once again facing. And so my job was to really find opportunities to partner with an important ally in Spain around our common values and our shared interests. And we did that in a number of ways. And then things changed, but I think we see what a difference elections make. And I just wanted to make the comment that if you look at the people that are now in positions of steering American foreign policy, there are many, many senior members of the administration who have good knowledge of Spain and good knowledge of the U.S.-Spain relations. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, accompanied then Vice President Biden on his trip to Spain. The ambassador, the CIA director, Ambassador Bill Burns, who had been the Deputy Secretary of State in the Obama administration, is now running the CIA, but he's someone who knows Spain quite well. And the national security advisors to the Vice President, Nancy McEldowney and Phil Gordon, occupied the position of Assistant Secretary for Europe and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe in the Obama administration. I guess the point I wanted to make is that Spain has a lot of friends in the Biden administration. Spain has a lot of people who know and value the Spain-U.S. relationship. And so I think that from a personnel standpoint, there is the basis for close cooperation between Spain and the United States going forward. Now we can talk about immigration.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. I want to ask you a little bit about immigration. So as we all know, as a consequence of the job losses that were caused by the pandemic, and some alleged attempt to protect US jobs. President Trump imposed in April of 2020 a suspension of most types of non-immigrant visas and green cards, which impacted significantly many companies from Spain doing business in the US. The US Chamber of Commerce and many organizations criticized this decision, arguing that it could block access to key talents and for investment in the US and would hurt the US economy. In February of this year, President Biden canceled Trump's suspensions of immigration visas, and the remaining suspension of non-immigrant visas were not extended and expired at the end of March. So it seems like we're in a very different era now. At the same time, President Biden has a strong commitment to reduce the level of unemployment in the US, obviously, which some perceive as conflicting priorities. So I wanted to ask you about your views of what can be expected regarding immigration in the US, and in particular as it impacts companies from international companies, companies from Spain and others doing business in the US.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to comment on that, because let me say that it is my view that the reason why President Trump suspended immigration visas was really not based objectively on a fear of losing American jobs. I think it had a lot more to do with the general pulling up of the drawbridge around and a bit of isolationism that was practiced during the Trump administration, and a view that that America was going to go it alone, and for that matter, a fear of certain foreign countries and foreign nationals. I don't worry so much about. I think the Biden administration has a very, very different view of immigration, and I think it sees immigration as an important component of growing the U.S. economy, not of threatening the U.S. economy. So the one thing, or the first thing, that significant thing that President Biden has done was to cancel, or was to let the Trump proclamations expire in March of this year, and so that H-1B visas will be available. The problem that we face right now is a combination of the travel ban between Spain and the United States, the fact that right now Spain is, and for that matter, all the countries in the Schengen region are barred from traveling to the United States, and so that's really what is interfering with the ability of Spanish nationals coming here to work in companies. And the other is there is a backlog that has been caused by a reduction in force in our consular corps that took place both because of barring immigration, but also because of belt tightening during the pandemic. But if you look at the immigration bill that President Biden has announced, and you'll see a section where it very clearly believes that clearing visa backlogs, reducing wait times, eliminating per country visa caps are all ingredients for growing the economy, making it easier for the graduates of U.S. universities who are foreign nationals, who graduate with STEM degrees specifically to stay in the United States, to work, to start companies. And I think we also know that the United States depends upon immigration and a growing workforce. And so President Biden intends to provide a path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented residents of the United States. I think both as a matter of fairness, but also a recognition of the importance of immigrants to our country. So I think that the real big problem that Spanish companies have to struggle with is not going to be the cancellation or the elimination of, say, H-1B visas and other non-immigrant visas. It's really going to be the continuation of the travel ban, which will require significant mitigation in the pandemic and the backlog. I know that U.S. embassies are terribly overwhelmed by the volume of these applications, and frankly, they've been instructed to treat green card applicants first. But I think in the long run that this will sort itself out, and that we'll be in a much better position. I will say, just numerically, I think Spain saw a reduction of non-immigrant visas go from over 40,000 back in fiscal year 2019 to 15,000 in fiscal 20. So that's an indication of how serious was the reduction. But as I say, I think that will pick up as we get further along in combating the pandemic. And I don't know if Ambassador Cabanas agrees with my perspective on that.
Yes, certainly, Ambassador. I do agree with you, and I agree also with this hope that as we move along with the vaccination process, we will be able to return to normal exchanges and procedures.
Thank you, Ambassador Solomont and Ambassador Cabanas. I want to follow on what Mr. Solomont was saying about travel bans and ask Ambassador Cabanas about it. This is an issue that has impacted many Spaniards living or planning to live in the US, as well as many companies from Spain trying to do business in the US. As Ambassador Solomont said, now the visas are open, but people cannot travel to the US still, right? So in March 2020, President Trump signed a proclamation that imposed a travel ban for most travelers coming to the US who'd been in countries from the Schengen area, which includes Spain, in the previous 14 days. And that ban with minor modification is still effective. In fact, for some time there were national interest exceptions that were given, and I understand that they have been made a little tougher recently. So there's been some unconfirmed reports about the possibility that this ban might be going away mid-May, but I don't think official. So I wanted to ask Ambassador Cabanas if you have any updates on this issue and what are your expectations?
Well, thank you, Gonzalo. No, I wish I could give you an update, an accurate update, but of course the situation evolves according to the pandemic and the evaluation that both in the EU and the US we make about the possibilities of travel. It's something that has been occupying a lot of our time, a lot of the time of all diplomats around the world, I can imagine, in this difficult time, trying to maintain as much as we could the flow of exchanges, educational, cultural, economic, during this time of restrictions, of travel bans due to the pandemic. We are very conscious of, as you can imagine, in a country highly dependent on tourism, of the great harm that this travel ban and difficulties to move for international mobility cause to our economy. And I'm personally very conscious of the great difficulties of both the American citizens, as Ambassador Solomon said, trying to reach Spain, and Spanish citizens trying to come here, trying to move from the United States to Spain and back to the United States. We're doing what we can. All our consulate generals have been open all the time, working overtime to try to facilitate the national interest exceptions, trying to facilitate this international mobility. We wish we could do more. We've done everything we can. We've paid special attention, of course, to humanitarian cases, but all the cases are important, and every single one of them has a real story behind, and we've tried to help as much as we can. There are discussions within the EU, there are discussions, the OCDE, discussions with our friends, the American administration, to try to facilitate as much as we can and as soon as possible the international mobility. For the moment, I have no news. I hope with vaccination expanding, we will be able to have them. But I wish I could tell you something more clear and more optimistic. But for the moment, I don't think we have news, Gonzalo.
Understand. Ambassador Solomon, I don't know if you want to add anything to that topic, or we can move to trade and tariffs, which is a very big one that I'm sure many people are interested in hearing.
Yeah, let us deal with that. I think that's an important issue, and I have a few things to say about it.
Okay, very good. So there's been very good news on trade and tariffs, and there's some potential issues moving forward. And I want to ask you both. So on the good news side, we had, as we all know, for a long time, an escalation in the tension between Spain and within the European Union and the US. A lot of it was linked to tariffs imposed, like some of it was related to the tariffs connected with the public aid to Boeing and Airbus, which in the frame of the World Trade Organization led to the authorization to impose tariffs on each side, and the US was very, very tough in that sense. Actually, recently the European Union and the US agreed on a suspension. With the new administration, there was clearly a change, and that's very good news. However, there's been some talk recently, and the US Trade Representative Catherine Tai has been speaking recently about the possibility of applying tariffs on goods from 6 countries, which includes Spain, as retaliation for the digital services taxes that have impacted large US providers like Google, Facebook, or Amazon. So that's a part of what we see now. We are hoping that there will be a more open era, and in fact, there's some hopes that the talks for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP, which was an agreement that was started. The discussions were started with you, Ambassador Solomon, were ambassador to Spain in the Obama era, but that did not lead to a signed agreement. Some people are hoping that we could go as far as restarting conversations for a free trade agreement. So what do you see moving forward? What are your expectations? Can we be optimistic?
I hope so. I mean, first of all, I think it's worth pointing out the context, which is that Spain and the United States have had in the past very solid bilateral trade relations. I think in 2019, the United States was the 6th largest destination for Spanish exports, and I think it's the largest destination for Spanish exports outside of the European Union. And Spanish companies are very well established in the American market, especially in food and agriculture, consumer goods, renewable energy for sure. So there's a very good history, and I think a very good future. I think that the Biden administration is very interested in reducing trade tensions between the United States and Europe. I don't think it intends to use tariffs in the same way that the previous administration did. I think everyone knows that President Biden had a very good conversation with the President of the European Commission, and they suspended the tariffs that had existed on between Boeing, or the trade dispute between Boeing and Airbus, which had, I think, garnered the most attention, and also have lifted the 25% tariffs on certain goods that hit some of the Spanish products especially hard, especially Spanish olive oil, for example, as well as wine and Manchego cheese, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that you've seen already in the first not even 100 days of the Biden administration a real interest in not imposing trade restrictions on our closest trading partner and our closest friends in the European Union, and that certainly includes Spain. I know there's been some concern about actions that have been taken against some of the U.S. technology companies. Frankly, I think the United States, some of the same technology companies are under scrutiny back in the United States as well in certain of their practices. And so I don't expect to see the Biden administration use tariffs as a kind of weapon or in place, say, of real diplomacy. I mean, one of the things that will characterize the Biden administration is putting diplomacy first in its foreign policy, and even with respect. So I don't think we will see trade wars to the same extent that we have in the past. I certainly hope we don't. Let me say a little bit about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, because you're right, Gonzalo. It was something that was a very big priority towards the end of during the Obama presidency, and it was something that we did work on quite a bit, especially the last year or so of my tour in Spain. And we were really trying to convince our Spanish counterparts that this was an opportunity for Spanish leadership, that we were looking for allies in Europe who would become big promoters of this trade alliance that we were proposing. It was met with some skepticism in some places in other countries, and we thought that Spain probably appreciated the trade relationship and the investment relationship between the United States and Spain as much as any European country. And unfortunately, however, it was not to be at that time. I know that there are, I just read an article from the Atlantic Council, one of our think tanks in Washington, that is especially concerned about the North Atlantic Partnership, talking about what it would take to revive TTIP. And so, although I don't think it's something we can expect to have attention focused on in the near term, I do think it may be possible to bring that back. I think there's some recognition that President Trump's cancellation of the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership was probably not a good thing to have done. But I would say this, and I think this is sort of the context for looking at all of the decisions that the Biden administration is making. There's no question that the number one priority is to try to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and revive the U.S. economy. And those, of course, go hand in hand. And I think you're going to see, I know we're going to talk about infrastructure in a couple of minutes, because I think that's part of the Biden administration's focus on a tool that can make a significant steps in reviving our economy, or continuing its revival that we've seen so far. So I think we're going to have to, realize that those things are going to be job number one, and something like reviving the Trans-Pacific, the transit TTIP is something that we're probably not going to see be a priority in the short run, but may well become something of importance down the road, and I certainly hope so.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador Solomont. Ambassador Cabanas, I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about this topic, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Gonzalo. I quite agree with Ambassador Solomont on this common wish to reduce tensions. I think this is what is the characteristic of these first months. And I appreciate also that he highlighted the important data regarding our trade relations, which have increased enormously, both trade and investment relations. Regarding the Boeing Airbus issue, I think really the March 5th decision, the truce agreed is really very good news. It's a very good starting point because it has indeed caused considerable damage, as you mentioned, to Spanish exporters, especially those who don't have anything to do with the aviation industry, especially in the food sector. And yes, this suspension of tariffs for many food exporters is very welcome news. The tariffs still on black olives are still in force, because that's another different issue. That's an investigation on anti-dumping. But now is the time to solve this problem, and it would be very important to solve it. First, because it doesn't make any sense for allies and partners to hurt each other, as we're doing, in which only benefits a third party that uses state subventions and state support for developing their own aviation industry, and that is China. It doesn't make any sense. And the second reason is that if we reach a EU-US agreement on state subsidies, this could well serve as the international standard, and that would be a highly significant measure to provide a working framework that provides greater control on third-party actors. So very important. I hope we can use the time that we have in front of us, the 4 months we have in time in front of us, to solve this issue. The digital tax, an important question that comes up frequently when I have any kind of conversation here in the US. I think, again, there is a willingness to cooperate in this issue. We agree, I believe, in two main things. The first one is that a tax on digital services is not only a matter of fairness in an increasingly digital economy, but it also provides a more stable and predictable framework for companies to operate. So in itself, it would be very good to reach an agreement on financial tax services and its implementation. But the second one, the very important agreement too, is that we believe that the OECD, the Organization for Cooperation and Development in Europe, is the right place where we should find that solution. It's the right place to discuss a tax on digital services. In the meantime, it is true that Spain, along with other European countries, have introduced their own taxes on digital services. The Spanish one is clearly non-discriminatory. It does not go or discriminate against any country. It only sets parameters on the services that can be taxed. With the previous administration, the USTR started a procedure against these countries that have approved these laws under Section 301. Still under the previous administration, in January 14th, the USTR decided that these laws discriminated against US firms, so that they could impose, they reached the conclusion that they could impose tariffs on goods to be determined. And on March 25th, as you mentioned, Gonzalo, the present administration, continuing with the procedure that they were obliged to continue, published a list of goods that could, I remark, could be subject to tariffs. At this moment, we are in a period of consultations, of public consultations, but for the moment, there are no tariffs. And as I believe we are committed to finding a solution in the framework of this OECD process, we really hope that we'll be able to find this agreement without going into the process of establishing tariffs. So again, on both issues, this willingness that Ambassador Solomont mentioned to find the common ground, to reduce tensions, this common desire, I think we hope, all of us, I think, hope that we will find a way to reach agreements.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ambassador Cabanas. I want to change to a different topic, and Ambassador Solomont mentioned earlier the infrastructures bill, whose official name is the American Jobs Plan, and as you all know, is a massive bill of $2.3 trillion or billion in Europe. And it includes massive investments in infrastructures and technologies preventing climate change, as well as corporate tax increases. It's currently under intensive negotiation at the US Congress between Democrats and Republicans, and even within the Democratic Party, there's a lot of negotiations. There's different views about what to do about this, and some people expect maybe a much smaller bill. So Ambassador Solomont, you obviously know very well the renewable energy sector. You're acting as an advisor to Avangrid, which is Iberdrola's subsidiary in the US. And I wanted to ask you about the infrastructures bill. What's your view about how this could evolve, and how would this be an opportunity for international companies, in particular companies from Spain who are very strong in construction and renewable energy?
Thank you, Gonzalo. And the president has announced a massive piece of legislation, which is called the American Jobs Plan, but is also known as a huge infrastructure investment. It calls for spending $2.3 trillion over 8 years. And if it is enacted, or if some version of it is enacted, especially that part of it that focuses on physical infrastructure, it will represent, I think, enormous opportunity for Spanish companies, because it calls for a huge investment in, first of all, transportation. In $620 billion of the proposal goes towards surface transportation, such as highways and rail and roads. 85 billion would go to mass transit systems. That's an area of that speaks to both Spain's construction industry. Spain has some of the largest construction companies in the world, and many of whom, if not all of whom, are doing business in the United States. They're building underground subways and tunnels and toll roads. They're also, I don't have to tell anybody listening about Spain's expertise in the area of high-speed rail. When I served in Spain and we were looking at the stimulus package, we thought $900 billion was a lot of money in those days. When we looked at the $900 billion stimulus package that Obama had enacted, and we were looking at I think a $9 billion commitment to high-speed rail, we entertained then Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood, who came to Spain specifically to look at its high-speed rail system. I remember we took a ride on the very first, when the route between Madrid and Valencia was opened. I rode with the Secretary and with the Minister of Infrastructure to Cuenca. And when we arrived in Cuenca, we had a meeting with some of the largest Spanish companies that are involved in both construction and high-speed rail. So I think there's great opportunity in that sector as well. And then, of course, in water, but in renewable energy for sure. One of the uses to which the Biden administration wants to apply this legislation is to really deal with climate change and to make a significant dent in our country's effort to reduce our carbon footprint. And so that would mean big investments in wind and solar, especially offshore wind. We are looking at the possibility of making offshore wind a huge new industry, especially on the East Coast, and the states of Massachusetts and New Jersey, New York are all making commitments to that. So there is this huge piece of the bill that is dedicated to sectors that would be great opportunities for Spanish companies, and where Spanish companies could bring, their capacity and also their expertise. But that's not all that's in the infrastructure bill. There's a great deal more that that may not attract such bipartisan support. There are parts of the bill that would speak to the wages that workers earn on working on some of these projects, or the ability of workers to unionize, which is something that's going to be of concern to the Republicans. There's also how do we pay for it, and it's been proposed that it would be paid for by a reduction in the corporate tax, an increase in the corporate tax, from 21% to 28%. And already some Democratic senators have said that's a non-starter. They may be willing to go to 25%, but not to 28%. I think that the most likely possibility for getting at least part of this done and for getting the infrastructure part of it done is really to divide this bill into pieces. And there have been some Democratic senators who have proposed taking an $800 billion chunk, if you will, which is something we think that could be enacted on a bipartisan basis, and focusing that pretty exclusively on sort of physical infrastructure and trying to get that enacted. And then for the Democrats to try to get the other parts of the legislation enacted using the reconciliation mechanism. There are lots of hoops that have to be jumped through in order to get there. There's a lot of challenges. Unlike the American Rescue Act that was enacted rather quickly with only Democratic support, I think the Biden administration is going to be more open to input and to suggestions and to changes, and it's not going to be in quite such a rush. So I think I think there is great possibility for Spanish companies. I think it is a great thing for the American economy. I just think it's going to be a tough political road, and we're going to see a lot of political machinations unfolding around this in the coming months.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador Solomont. Ambassador Cabanas, you want to follow up on this topic?
I just would like to thank Ambassador Solomont for his very kind words regarding Spanish companies. I quite agree with him that this great transformation and modernization of the American economy and its infrastructure does provide opportunities, good opportunities, we hope, for Spanish companies. They're very experienced and prestigious companies, the very best in the world, indeed, regarding infrastructure, transportation, renewable energy, water and sanitation. So we're looking very closely at the development of this bill or bills, and we hope that it will increase our bilateral cooperation and the presence of Spanish companies here.
Very good. We've had some questions from the audience, but they're related to topics I think we've covered, and we want to ask a few more things. We've received questions about the digital tax and about the travel ban. I think we've said quite a bit about that. So let's do a very quick question for each of you. Ambassador Cabanas, and I would appreciate if we can be brief because we don't want to go beyond the scheduled time we had. So there's obviously Spain is going through a difficult time through this pandemic, and there's also been a number of political issues, political tensions, and which have received some attention from the US in media, and maybe deterring to some extent investments in Spain or companies going to Spain to establish operations there. So what can we say to reassure potential investors about why Spain is a good destination?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I like that because there are many, many reasons why Spain is a good destination for investment. I'll try to be brief, but the first one obviously is the good experience of American companies over the years. And I think Ambassador Solomon already mentioned that. We had an accumulated stock investment in 2018, something like 87 billion euros of American investment in Spain. Very similar, by the way, a very similar number to the Spanish investment here in the United States. But that's a very important one. It's a very good experience that the Americans have American companies have had in Spain. Second reason, the fundamentals are right. In spite of the negative effects of the pandemic during this past year, I think we were expected to grow about 6% in 2021. We are expected to receive the next EU generation funds. That's a lot of money that will provide for good investments, especially in the transformation of our digital economy and in turning green, our green economy. So there are many opportunities. There are going to be many opportunities there. Third, we are an open and dynamic economy. I think we're the fourth EU economy, and certainly one of the least restrictive economy for international investments. Another reason is that we have a very important strategic hub. We've already mentioned that, but we have, I think, the best highway and freeways in Europe. We are the second largest high-speed train network in the world after China. We have two of the largest and most important airports in Europe, 3 or 4 of the most important and active ports. So it's a very important and strategic hub. Another reason, highly trained human capital, highly skilled labor force, as the American companies know. And finally, just to make it short, and I think Ambassador Solomont will agree with me, we have a very high quality of life, as any foreigner living in Spain knows. So I think these are very good reasons for US companies to keep investing in my country, in Spain.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cabanas. Ambassador Solomont, I don't think we need to convince anybody that the US is a good place to do business. So I wanted to, take into account that you know extremely well both Spain and the US, and you're acting in the board of directors of a major Spanish-owned company, Avangrid, and also you're the chairman of the Spain-US Chamber of Commerce. You have a unique view of the challenges faced by companies from Spain trying to get access to the US market. So I wanted to ask if you had any advice for companies in that position in terms of strategies and opportunities for the post-pandemic era.
I do, but let me just say I couldn't agree with Ambassador Cabanas more about all of the qualities that make Spain an important destination for U.S. investment, including the wonderful quality of life that I had the opportunity and the pleasure to enjoy for nearly 4 years. I would just add one other thing that's interesting about the strategic location of Spain is the markets, the access to markets in Africa. And, Africa is a continent with 800 million people and growing markets, I believe, and that may be an area of significant economic growth in the future. I certainly hope so. I think that that my advice to companies, Spanish companies coming to the United States, and I would say that most of the largest Spanish companies have established important footholds here, and two things that I think have enabled Spanish companies to be successful. One is to partner with American companies and to work with American service providers and to help ease or help open up opportunities. Actually, Gonzalo, I think you have a company that does that sort of thing. And I think one of the challenges is to try to open up the United States as a place for investment by small and medium-sized Spanish enterprises. It can be a little daunting, but it's a huge market. I also think that given the fact that the largest growing ethnic group in the United States are Spanish speakers, I think people know that there are more Spanish speakers in the United States than there are in Spain. I think that's an opportunity and not a market that's ever been necessarily exploited, I think, as well as it could be. And the last thing I would say is that when you look at the companies, the Spanish companies that have been especially successful in the United States, they're companies that also really put down strong roots in local communities, and hired Americans and respected, the different culture that exists in the United States and really got to know the communities in which it was doing business. And I really think that's an important, I guess it's probably important wherever you do business, but I think especially in this country with such a diverse population to begin with and diverse communities across the country, it's really serves the interests of Spanish companies here to have strong roots in communities, to hire, local people who understand those communities to guide their efforts. But I would say that and the Spanish companies have had great success in the United States, and I fully expect that will continue.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ambassador Solomont. And I think we could spend many hours talking about all these fascinating issues, but unfortunately, we need to start wrapping up. So I want to give you both an opportunity for any closing remarks. Ambassador Cabanas.
Well, thank you. I would just like to say thank you very much to you, Gonzalo, and to USEC for the great job that you do. It's very important that in these times of difficulties in which, yes, our exchanges, our international mobility is restricted, we keep on working hard to maintain the excellent relations between Spain and the United States. I'm absolutely convinced that with the new administration, we will not only continue to strengthen the bilateral ties, that whatever administration might be in power will always continue, but that we will be able to reinvent and to work together for this common objective of building back better a new world order, which is full of challenges. We need our cooperation, we need our friendship, we need our partnership, and we need all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cabanas. Ambassador Solomont.
Well, thank you, Gonzalo, for giving me the last word. First of all, let me apologize for the technical difficulties. I thought that my office had prepped us sufficiently, and apparently not. My apologies to all, and I want to say what a pleasure it is to share this program with Ambassador Cabanas. I think that the United States and Spain enjoy a very special relationship. That is one of long-standing. I mean, as everybody knows, I mean, the history of Spanish involvement in the United States goes back as far as any country, and for various reasons, I think that Spain has been a very strong ally of the United States. That was certainly my experience when I served as ambassador. One thing that I think has always been a challenge for Spain in the United States or in the relationship is really the need to strengthen its visibility and its brand. Americans should know a lot more about Spain than they do. I don't have to tell you this audience how important the tourism sector is to the Spanish economy. And of course, it's had to take a pause, but I'm sure it will come back. But if you look at the numbers, Spain, a country of 47 million people, was attracting over 80 million tourists every year. But the number of American tourists was actually quite small in relative terms. And that's just one example of I think, the need to increase Spain's visibility, strengthen Spain's brand. I will say Spain is very popular for college students. It's the third most popular destination for U.S. students who wish to study abroad. And every single student I've ever talked to who has studied in Spain has absolutely loved the experience and gained enormously from it. So now that I'm a private citizen and in my capacity as chairman of the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce and also on the board of an important Spanish company here, I want to do my part in strengthening the relationship and also helping to strengthen the brand, because as a result of my experiences, I became a great lover of your country, and that didn't end when I returned to this country, and will continue. So thank you very much, Gonzalo, for including me in this program, and my best regards to Ambassador Cabanas.
Thank you, Ambassador. Great honor to be with you.
Well, I would just like to thank you both, Ambassador Cabanas and Ambassador Solomont. It was a real pleasure to have you here today. I think this conversation was fascinating, and I think we can all agree that you know, a lot can be achieved for both Spain and the US working together. I happen to be a very privileged dual citizen of both countries, and any efforts that bring us closer clearly will be beneficial for both countries. So before we close the event, I would just like to encourage attendees who believe in the mission of USEC, the US Spain Executives Community, to check our webpage and to consider joining us. And I would like to mention we are going to have a webinar at the beginning of June with representatives from large Spanish companies in the US. So I invite you all to join. We'll be talking more about some of the topics we've discussed today, but from a more microeconomics perspective. And I would just like to thank one more time our sponsors, TAPS, a bank, Porcelanosa and Artichoke, who made this event possible. And thank you all for joining us today. So have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias, muchos.